Good evening, everyone. Hopefully, everyone had a great day. For those who don't know, my name is RJ Hopwood, and tonight we'll be discussing speech and language impairment. As you can see from this introduction page, there's a multitude of things that we'll be discussing when we're talking about speech and language issues. In my experience, some of the things that I anticipated we'd be discussing are highlighted here prominently, mainly the speech pathologists and audiologists. One thing I actually didn't anticipate falling under this umbrella was swallowing issues, and we'll get into that in greater detail a little later. So moving forward to slide 2 here, a general overview. This is a great snapshot of here of what's involved with this issue. And as you can see, we'll be getting into some of the characteristics of the disorder by way of providing you with a specific definition. And in addition to that, we'll get into some of the assistive technology that's utilized and how it's incorporated into assignments and activities. So what is speech and language impairment? The Individuals with Disability Education Act, abbreviated as IDEA, I think that's something that we've all come across at this point. It defines the disorder as a communication disorder, such as stuttering, impaired articulation, a language impairment, or a voice impairment that adversely affects a child's educational performance. Each point within this definition represents a speech and language subcategory that we'll get into, starting with language impairment, which can be defined as a student having difficulty comprehending words properly, expressing oneself, and listening to others. Secondly, a communication disorder is something such as stuttering, which can also be an example of a fluency disorder. In addition to that, you could have unusual word repetition and hesitant speech. Those are also examples of fluency disorder. Another issue here is an impaired articulation disorder, which indicates issues in which a child experiences challenges in pronouncing specific sounds. Finally, a voice impairment involves difficulty voicing words, and as an example, this could actually be throat issues, which causes an abnormally soft voice. Moving forward, just some further details on the things that I was just touching on. But as mentioned earlier, we talked about the swallowing disorder, and I don't think I'm going to pronounce this correctly, but it's known as dysphagia. And this is when a student has a feeding or swallowing difficulties, which may result or may follow an illness, surgery, stroke, or injury. And if you're interested, obviously you'll have access to this presentation, so you can further your readings here on the different disorders. Moving forward, we're getting into some statistics on speech and language disorders. So in 2012, this study was conducted, and 7.7% of children in the age bracket of 3 to 17 had a communication disorder during the past 12 months. Speech disorders were the most prevalent communication disorder, while swallowing issues were the least prevalent at 0.9%. So moving forward, let's talk a little bit about broad strategies for dealing with language impairment. As you can see here, there's quite a few, but a few that stuck out to me were working at the student's pace, presenting one concept at a time, and being aware of the student's functioning level in auditory skills, semantics, word recall, syntax, phonology, and pragmatics, focusing on how these things affect academic performance. Moving forward into broad strategies for dealing with speech impairment. Same thing, there's quite a few here, but a couple that stuck out to me are modeling correct speech patterns and avoid correcting speech difficulties whenever possible, and encouraging participation in classroom activities and discussions. I've seen that work quite well. So moving forward into the A slide here, we're going to talk a little bit about speech language pathologists and some of the strategies and interventions they use. In my experience, they can be extremely effective in helping people develop effective communication skills. And one great thing they do, among many other things, is evaluating, selecting, and developing an augmentative and alternative communication system to help the student. And obviously, there's some more details here that are probably worth getting into. So let's talk a little bit about those assistive technologies that are used in addressing speech and language. So one thing that we see is computer software packages can be used, and they've been developed for speech and language skills. An example of this would be First Words. And this is a program that uses graphic presentations combined with synthesized speech to teach high frequency nouns. I personally haven't seen this used, but I've communicated with other people that have used it to great effect. A second, more prevalent tool is what's called an augmentative or alternative communication tool, and I believe that's abbreviated as AAC. And this can be defined as the use of symbols, aids, strategies, and techniques to enhance the communication process. This includes sign language communication boards, both manual and electronic. The objective of these tools is to help the student make a choice. As an example, does the student want to go to the bathroom, yes or no, or helping with deciding whether or not the student wants to eat. Obviously, it can be much more complex than that, but that's a simplistic form of it. And I need some clarity from the professor, but I believe the Fitzgerald key may fall underneath this realm as well, which I'm sure most people are familiar with. Um, so let's move forward to the electronic versions of the AAC. And these devices can range from ones with a few buttons and those that are quite elaborate. And an example of something that's a simplistic version is Cheap Talk. And a more elaborate version could be or is called Dynavox and the Liberator. I've seen these used to great effect, and it's quite inspiring to see children who've been struggling with their voice to have a voice given to them, even the quietest student, with technology. Um, okay, moving forward, who we'll collaborate with. Um, so I think that there's a bunch of people that it's in our best interest to collaborate with, but generally speaking, will involve the general ed teacher, the special ed teacher, the speech and language pathologist, a school psychologist, the paraprofessional, and of course the parents. I think the main thing here is that it's a collaborative approach, and obviously the student's voice is included here as best as possibly can be done. So moving forward into organizations that work with speech and language impairment and the services they provide, the main one that I came across is the American Speech Language Hearing Association, ASHA, and they do tremendous work. They're empowering and supporting speech language pathologists, audiologists, speech and language and hearing scientists, and they're doing this by advocating on behalf of persons with these disorders. They're advancing communication science and promoting effective human communication. And if you take it upon yourself to do some further research on this topic, you'll certainly see that name come up. And there's a few others you can see here as well. And lastly, we'll get into the differentiated learning activity example. So I decided that we'd settle on a reading assignment with new vocabulary words. So here's a couple of the measures that I sought to take that I thought will put the student in a position of success. 1 week prior to introducing the lesson, the student would be given a list of key vocabulary words. We'll discuss those words and what they mean, and this will help introduce these new concepts to the student. In addition to that, we'll give the students a graphic organizer or a visual map showing the relationships between these words, a synonym, antonym, and associated words. I think this will further the student's understanding. And of course, when possible, we'll pair these new vocabulary words with a picture. I think this, again, can be used to great effect. We'll associate those new words with a personal experience that the students may have. I think if you're successful with this, you can see the light bulb go off with the student. And in addition, the new vocabulary words and definitions will be written on note cards. Obviously, we can use those in the class to great effect as well, but also the student can take them home and play memory or matching games with their parents or siblings. We did this last year with one student, and I think it was his second year in the school. He came from Dominican Republic and spoke no English. And clearly, we've done great work in the school, but the work at home actually was a tremendous contributor to that as well. So moving forward from there, word lists will be created with the new vocabulary, words, and definitions that can be displayed around the classroom so the students can relate back to them as needed. I actually remember that being a tool for myself in my high school days. And finally, the activity will be completed in a group setting. And the groups will be comprised of students with similar learning styles in order to encourage collaboration through common work and thinking practices. And the last thing I'll say is whenever possible, we have the speech pathologists involved collaborating with us on this subject. And I think the relationship with the paraprofessionals, in addition to the other relationships, but specifically that, is incredibly important. I've seen tremendous relationships developed over the years between the paraprofessionals and students, in addition to the teachers as well, but they'll certainly be brought into the fold as well. So that's going to wrap up the presentation. Hopefully I did a good job communicating these ideas to you. And if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them. Thank you.